Hello everyone, so if you're just joining me, this is part 2 of a video about my reflections on China. Part 1 was focusing more on the negative, and basically what I'm doing in these videos is laying out my reflections on China as an outsider, my reflections on China the country, well, not just China the country, every aspect of China, what I think of it. And I want to do this before I potentially teach over there. Now, in the first video I laid out the negative, and that came down to human rights abuses and censorship. Those are two areas I'm deeply uncomfortable with. Because of the censorship, I think it's going to be very hard for me to make these videos out in China. It's going to be very hard for me to express my real views out there. And I do anticipate that's going to be one of the biggest personal challenges for me. That is keeping my mouth shut about my views on the Communist Party over there. I just have to not think about it, basically, and I'm going to find that a major challenge, in all honesty. Anyway, with these videos I want to lay out the positive and negative. In this video I focus on the negative, that was human rights abuses and censorship. In this video I want to focus more on the positive, and I also have a lot of positive overviews about China. Firstly, it's partly related to the last video, that is, no matter how hard China was in the past, I genuinely do believe it's come a long way. There remains huge challenges and major moral issues, but I do believe, to give China credit, it has come a long way. There's areas it can improve. Censorship, I believe, is still a major problem, but in a country of 1.3 billion, we have to put things in context. China has come a long way, and that's an issue that shouldn't be undervalued. So I give the country credit for that. I also think Chinese people are a lot more enlightened than they used to be. They are a lot less sheepish. In the past they would just follow the crowd, and they really, frankly, would be brainwashed. Today I think that term is more complex. There will still be a lot of people who blindly believe the Communist Party no matter what, but I do think that's getting less and less now. I think there are a lot more people who, even if they don't agree with me about issues like human rights, they will be frustrated with things like corruption. So there is definitely an awakening among the Chinese people in recent years, and that's obvious. And the communist regime knows this, and they know that they've had to adapt to some extent. And there are moderates, comparative moderates within the party, like Wen Jiabao, who I believe do want to make some reforms. And I hope that faction of the party gets more influence, because that's going to determine the next generation of Chinese leadership. Like, we know China's not going to go democratic overnight, but that will determine the next generation. Anyway, that's the more positive outlook in terms of politics. I do think things are improving. It's slow, there's a long way to go, but things, I believe, are better than they were in the past. Anyway, other areas. Chinese food. I love Chinese food. I think it's diverse, very tasty, very filling. I don't think it can ever be boring because there's so many variations. You know, people say Chinese food's but it's not true that everyone in China eats dogs. You know, that's not the case. I think it's more provincial. I think you get that in certain provinces, but generally Chinese cuisine, I think, is good. Very tasty, so thumbs up for that. Traditional Chinese music, wonderful. I love that. I find it very relaxing, very creative. I think I made another video about the erhu. People are very welcome to check out that video. For those who don't know, the erhu is a traditional Chinese stringed instrument. You hear it in a lot of sort of traditional Chinese videos. I mean, Chinese modern pop, that's fine, but to me the sound is too much like Western sounds, so it's not really, it doesn't seem very Chinese to me. The only difference is obviously the people singing and the language, but the whole style is just like a Western pop song. But for me, listening to traditional Chinese songs, I find that very therapeutic, very relaxing. The costumes are beautiful. So I love the creativity that's involved in that, so full respect for that. Chinese history. Now, this might seem strange in light of the last video, but when I'm talking about Chinese history, I'm not necessarily talking about modern Chinese history. I'm talking about going back centuries. And obviously it's been very troubled at times, but I also think it's actually very interesting. From an academic perspective, I think if you're interested in history, China would definitely be one of the most interesting places to study. It varies from dynasty to dynasty, and each dynasty is unique, and I find that aspect fascinating. Whether it be Tang Dynasty, Qin Dynasty, Qing Dynasty, you name it. And I'm sort of trying to develop my knowledge on that. At the moment it's still average at best. I'm developing my knowledge on that. I'm not talking about the controversial history sort of in the communist era. I'm talking about sometimes ancient history. I've seen films like Red Cliff, which is an epic. I believe it's the highest grossing film ever. Superb film, by the way, if you get a chance to watch that. It's based on a famous rebellion during the Han Dynasty called the Cao Cao Rebellion, or the Cao Cao Conflict. And that's an epic film. It really is an incredible piece of film work, and I'd recommend that. And I'm fascinated by ancient Chinese history. China is one of the world's great civilizations, that goes without saying. China had established cities and great empires 3,000 years ago, even 4,000 years ago, if we go from the time of the very first dynasty, which I believe was a Xia dynasty, was semi-mythical. So leaving that aside, even if we go back to the Shang dynasty, which is 3,000 years ago roughly, China is definitely one of the world's oldest established civilizations, and I'm fascinated by old civilizations. I'm also fascinated by Iran and Egypt and other societies that have an ancient history. So that's fascinating in my opinion, and I give credit for that. Landscapes in China, I think China's a beautiful country. From what I've seen, obviously I've never been, but from what I've seen, there's parts of China really are stunning in terms of natural beauty. The Huangshan Mountains in Anhui province, magnificent. And some of the scenes I've seen from Yunnan province, I hope I get a chance to visit that because that really does look wonderful. So in terms of natural scenery, I think that's beautiful. I would also say, China's cities are fascinating, whether it be the ancient capital of Beijing or the modern metropolis of Shanghai, and then you have lots of sub-provincial cities that are developing, like Wuhan, Chongqing, Harbin, you name it. If you like cities, I think you're spoiled for choice in China. And some of them may not stand out that much, but I think that's fascinating, the fact there's so many cities and each one has some of its own characteristics. I think that's fascinating. What else? Also, Chinese people, actually. Now, I won't deny there are some Chinese individuals that really frustrate me when people make apologisms for the regime, when they go out of their way to defend what I regard as indefensible things like torture and so on. I do find that very hard to tolerate. I find it very hard to comprehend. I don't actually believe it's because they're bad, sadistic people. I really don't. I can tell these are decent people. I just think they're very, very misguided. And they, A, aren't seeing both sides, but B, they haven't seen the things I've seen. I've seen photos of torture victims, and that made my blood boil, and I honestly believe if these people saw that, they might change their stance. One of the young guys I was teaching, he was a bit of an apologist for the regime. He was absolutely determined that Tiananmen Square was an American conspiracy, etc, etc, etc. I had a few debates with him, and interestingly, he changed his stance. Whether that was my influence, I don't know, but I noticed he started to get more interested in the human rights side of things, so that's interesting. But anyway, not to go on about that. Some Chinese people do get on my nerves. The nationalism, I think I've spoken about that in other videos, that does make me very uncomfortable. And actually, I'd add that to another one of my negatives, along with human rights abuses and censorship. The rise of Chinese nationalism does make me uncomfortable, and I think there's a great hypocrisy there, because a lot of Chinese nationalists are always complaining about Western media bias, and they'll complain very loudly when there's racism levelled against them, and racism's wrong, obviously, but then when they come out with racism, and China does, I believe, have a racism problem, they just deny it. They say, oh, this word means something else in Chinese. Or, when Yang Rui, the TV presenter, came out with his racist rant, very, very few Chinese people condemned that. A lot of people made excuses for him and said, oh, he worded it badly, or what had happened was some foreigners had behaved badly in Beijing, so this idiot decided to basically castigate all foreigners, which simply wouldn't be tolerated anywhere else. But anyway, I don't want to go on too much about that. I think Chinese nationalism is very hypocritical and very arrogant. I don't like it. But then again, I don't like nationalism in any country. I don't like it in my country either. So I'm not picking on China there. I think there's a big difference between nationalism and patriotism. Patriots care about their country, but they can recognise their country's faults. Nationalists just blindly defend their country no matter what, or at least patriots may defend their country no matter what, but at least patriots will acknowledge their country's faults. Nationalists will not accept any criticism, and I have experience with this with some Chinese individuals, and I find it very arrogant and very, on one hand they play the victimhood card, on the other hand they'll arrogantly shout about, never challenge the Chinese because there's so many of us. So I think there is a deep arrogance on the part of some of these Chinese nationalists, and that comes from the leadership, because the Communist Party of China is probably the world's most arrogant political party. Whenever they are challenged, they'll always... I think when Xiaobao was in Britain, his excuse was, China's got an ancient civilization. Now that's funny, because I've just been praising that, but it's ironic that the communists would use that, because for years they suppressed China's ancient history, which is a bit hypocritical. Anyway, I think that sort of nationalist arrogance I really don't like. And I would say to Chinese people out there, you have every right to be patriotic and love your country, but accept its faults. Be open-minded enough to accept criticism. Be open-minded enough, or even if you don't take criticism from me, at least have the willpower to bring yourself to recognise China's faults and to criticise it. Okay, but that should be more for the last video. I want to speak also about the positive in this video, which I've been trying to do. And I think, people, a lot of Chinese people I've known on a personal basis have been honestly very amicable people. They're generous. They're intelligent, actually, in terms of they actually do have an interest in the outside world. Chinese people aren't like North Koreans. It's not like that. I do believe that Chinese people do actively take an interest in other cultures. Certainly from what I've seen from international students here, they do actively take an interest in British culture. And I think they're intelligent people. They're also very amicable. They're very polite, generally speaking. Sometimes very shy. But that's not a crime, it's just a characteristic, especially Chinese women. Shyness isn't a crime, but on a personal level, I've known a lot of Chinese people, maybe, and I'm not exaggerating, maybe 150 people I've met, and quite a number of them I've known reasonably well. So I've quite a lot of experience, and in my experience they're generous. They've always invited me to their place for dinner. They've always given me, I invited some of my Chinese friends to my birthday party, and they were very, very generous. They give me some wonderful presents. They're generous people, polite people, friendly people. I do think there's a tendency for some Chinese to follow the crowd, but then you get that in Britain as well. Some Chinese will think of their strength of numbers and use that to their advantage, which is a bit, on their part, a bit cowardly, but we can't generalise 1.3 billion people. Not everyone thinks like that. and most of the Chinese people I've known have been very amicable. Anyway, I'm running out of time here, so this is my reflections on China before I go to China. The negative: human rights abuses, censorship, neo-nationalism. The positive: food, culture, people generally speaking, landscape, and that's it, summed up. Okay, thank you. I may make another video when I come back from China. Okay, cheers.